On the morning of April 10, 1912, the largest moving object ever built by human hands left the port of Southampton, England, and began its journey across the Atlantic Ocean toward New York City. It was called the RMS Titanic. 882 feet long, 92 feet wide, 46,000 tons of steel, glass, wood, and iron. 11 stories tall from keel to funnel. It carried a grand staircase draped in oak paneling and a glass dome ceiling that let light pour down through every deck. It carried a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a squash court, a Turkish bath, a library, and dining rooms that rivaled the finest restaurants in London and Paris. It carried a Parisian café, a barber shop, a darkroom for photographers, and a hospital with a fully qualified surgeon. It carried 2,224 people. 4 days, 23 hours, and 40 minutes after leaving Southampton, at exactly 2:17 in the morning on April 15, 1912, the Titanic slipped beneath the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean in water 2.5 miles deep. 1,517 people went with it. The ship had been conceived in 1907 by two men having dinner together in Belfast. J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line Shipping Company, and Lord Peary, a partner in the shipbuilding firm Harland and Wolff. The conversation turned to the growing competition from rival shipping companies, particularly Cunard, whose ships Mauretania and Lusitania were the fastest liners afloat. White Star's answer would not be speed. It would be size and luxury. 3 ships, each one the largest ever built. Olympic, Titanic, Britannic. Construction of the Titanic began in Belfast in March 1909. 3,000 workers built her over the next 26 months. The steel hull plates were hammered into place by hand by riveters working in teams. The ship required 3 million rivets to hold its hull together. In the most stressed sections of the hull, near the bow, workers used iron rivets rather than steel, partly due to supply constraints, a detail that would later become significant. The Titanic was completed in early April 1912. Sea trials lasted 1 day. She was certified seaworthy. She departed Belfast for Southampton to begin her maiden voyage. Among those boarding at Southampton on April 10 were some of the wealthiest people in the world. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in America, worth roughly $87 million in the currency of 1912, the equivalent of over $2 billion today. He was traveling with his 18-year-old second wife Madeline, who was 5 months pregnant. Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a mining fortune. Isidor Straus and his wife Ida, co-owner of Macy's department store in New York. Margaret Brown, a Colorado socialite later nicknamed the unsinkable Molly Brown. Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon, members of British aristocracy. In first class, the finest staterooms cost the equivalent of over $100,000 in today's money. Passengers dined on oysters, salmon, filet mignon, roasted squab, peaches in chartreuse jelly, and French ice cream, washed down with the finest wines and champagnes. In steerage, third-class passengers, many of them emigrants from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, hoping for new lives in America, slept in simple bunks and ate simple but adequate meals in communal dining rooms. Third-class tickets cost the equivalent of around $700 today. The Titanic stopped at Cherbourg in France and Queenstown in Ireland to collect more passengers, then turned her bow westward toward New York. The voyage began in perfect conditions. The North Atlantic in April could be brutal, but the weather was unusually calm and clear. The sea was described by multiple passengers as flat as a lake, an almost glassy stillness that was, in a sense, deceptive. Flat seas meant no wave action at the base of icebergs, which meant no white foam to betray their presence in darkness. The Titanic was sailing through one of the worst iceberg seasons the North Atlantic had seen in decades. Warm weather in the Arctic had broken off an unusual number of bergs from Greenland's glaciers, and ocean currents had carried them south, directly into the main shipping lanes across the Atlantic. Throughout Sunday, April 14th, the Titanic received ice warnings by wireless telegraph from other ships in the area. The Caronia, the Baltic, the America, the Mesaba, which sent a warning that placed ice directly in the Titanic's path, in the most specific terms. This last warning never reached the bridge. It was taken by the wireless operator, Harold Bride, and set aside while he dealt with a backlog of passenger messages being relayed through Cape Race, Newfoundland. The Titanic did not slow down. Captain Edward Smith, a veteran of 40 years at sea and arguably the most experienced and respected captain in the White Star Fleet, was on the final voyage of his career before retirement. He maintained the ship's speed at around 22 knots, not the absolute maximum, but fast enough that a collision would be catastrophic. At 11:40 at night, lookout Frederick Fleet, stationed in the crow's nest high on the forward mast with no binoculars because the lookout's binoculars had inexplicably been left behind in Southampton, spotted something in the darkness directly ahead. He grabbed the phone to the bridge and reported 4 words. "Iceberg, right ahead." From the moment Fleet sounded the alarm to the moment the Titanic's hull made contact with the iceberg, approximately 37 seconds passed. First Officer William Murdoch ordered hard a starboard, reversing the meaning from the old tiller days: the ship's bow would swing left. He also ordered the engines stopped and then reversed. It was not enough time. The iceberg struck the starboard side of the bow at approximately 11:40 p.m. To those on board, the impact felt surprisingly mild. A vibration. A grinding sensation. Some passengers described it as the ship going over 1,000 marbles. Others barely noticed it and went back to sleep. Below the waterline, the damage was catastrophic. The iceberg had not punched a clean gaping hole in the hull, as it was later depicted in popular imagination. Rather, it had buckled and opened the hull plates along a length of roughly 300 feet, allowing water to pour into 6 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments. The Titanic had been designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. 6 was beyond saving. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, who was on board to observe the maiden voyage and note any issues, was summoned to assess the damage. He walked through the flooding compartments with Captain Smith, took out a notepad, made some calculations, and delivered his verdict. The ship would sink. In approximately 2 hours. The lifeboats became the central horror of what followed. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, including 4 collapsibles. Their total capacity was approximately 1,178 people. On a ship carrying 2,224, this meant that even if every lifeboat were filled to capacity, more than 1,000 people would be left behind. Not every lifeboat was filled to capacity. Not even close. The first lifeboat to be lowered, Lifeboat 7, held 65 people. It was launched with 28 aboard. Lifeboat 1, the emergency cutter with a capacity of 40, was launched with 12. One witness later noted that some officers were so convinced of the ship's stability that they expected the passengers to reboard once everything was sorted out. The reasons were multiple and overlapping. Initial passengers refused to leave what felt like the safety of the largest ship in the world for small boats dangling over black freezing ocean. Officers were not given clear instructions about whether to fill boats to capacity at the boat deck or to send them down and load from gangway doors below. Some gangway doors were never opened. Some partly loaded boats were launched early simply to get boats in the water and moving, with the intention of returning for more passengers, an intention that, in most cases, did not survive the chaos of the next 2 hours. Women and children first was the general principle. Its application varied enormously by deck, by officer, and by circumstance. In first class, where passengers knew where the boat deck was and had stewards to guide them, boarding was more organized. In third class, where many passengers did not speak English and where some accounts described gates separating steerage from upper decks being locked or guarded, survival rates were dramatically lower. Of the 325 first-class passengers, around 200 survived. Of the 709 third-class passengers, 174 survived. As the water rose through the lower decks and the bow dipped deeper, the atmosphere on the ship shifted from disbelief to terror. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, played on the boat deck throughout. Whether they played until the very end is debated, but multiple survivors recalled hearing music as they pulled away in lifeboats. The musicians all died. Benjamin Guggenheim changed from his life vest into his finest evening clothes. He reportedly told a steward to let it be known that Benjamin Guggenheim went down like a gentleman. Isidor Straus refused to board a lifeboat ahead of other men. His wife Ida refused to leave his side. They were last seen sitting together on deck chairs, holding hands as the water rose. Both died. Captain Smith was last seen on the bridge. His body was never recovered. Thomas Andrews, the man who had designed the ship and knew with mathematical precision that it was going to sink, was reportedly found in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting on the wall, his life jacket thrown over a chair beside him. He made no attempt to board a lifeboat. He was last seen helping passengers find life jackets in their rooms. His body was never recovered. At approximately 2 a.m., with the bow deeply submerged and the stern rising into the air, the Titanic broke apart. The forward section separated from the stern and plunged almost vertically downward, hitting the ocean floor 2.5 miles below at a speed estimated at 30 miles per hour, burying its nose 30 meters into the seabed. The stern section, suddenly free of the weight of the forward hull, snapped back briefly, then flooded and followed. It took 3 minutes to reach the bottom. At 2:17 a.m., the surface of the ocean was empty except for floating wreckage and, in the darkness, the sound of over 1,000 people in 31-degree water. Hypothermia in water that cold produces unconsciousness in roughly 15 minutes. Death follows shortly after. The Carpathia, which had received the Titanic's distress calls and raced through the night at full steam, arrived at the scene at 4:10 a.m. It recovered 705 survivors from the lifeboats. It found no one alive in the water. The wreck of the Titanic was discovered in September 1985 by a joint American-French expedition led by Robert Ballard. It lay on the ocean floor in 2 main sections, the bow and stern separated by roughly 600 meters, surrounded by a debris field of personal belongings, crockery, wine bottles, shoes, and thousands of other fragments of the lives that had been lived aboard her. The bow section, buried in silt up to the railing, was remarkably preserved, its grand staircase long rotted away, its hull being slowly consumed by iron-eating bacteria. The stern section, which imploded as it fell due to trapped air pockets, was twisted and compressed almost beyond recognition. The discovery confirmed what metallurgical tests on recovered hull steel had suspected. The steel used in the Titanic's hull was brittle at low temperatures. Instead of bending on impact, it fractured. The iron rivets used in sections of the bow were of substandard quality, popping open in rows as the iceberg ran along the hull rather than holding the plates together under stress. A ship described in the press before her maiden voyage as practically unsinkable, though the White Star Line itself never used those exact words officially, had been sunk by a combination of an unusual iceberg season, insufficient binoculars, ice warnings that went unheeded, speed maintained through a known danger zone, an inadequate number of lifeboats loaded well below capacity, and hull materials that performed worse than they should have in the freezing North Atlantic water. Every single one of those factors was a human decision, or the consequence of one. The Titanic still lies where it fell. It is slowly dissolving into the ocean floor. Scientists estimate that within another 2 to 3 decades, it will have collapsed entirely, leaving only a stain of rust and minerals on the seabed 2.5 miles below the surface of the North Atlantic, marking the place where, on a flat, glassy, moonless April night in 1912, the largest ship in the world discovered the exact limit of human confidence.